They lived by a code of honor so strict, they would rather die by their own sword than face shame. For over 1,000 years, these elite warriors shaped the destiny of an entire nation. They were not just soldiers, they were philosophers, poets, and enforcers of an ironclad morality. But as Japan opened its doors to the modern world, these once feared warriors became relics of the past. Who were the samurai? What secrets did their Bushido hold? Why did one of the most powerful warrior classes in history vanish almost overnight? This is the epic story of loyalty, betrayal, and the slow death of a centuries-old way of life. Welcome to the rise and fall of feudal Japan through the eyes of its most legendary figures, the samurai. Origins of the samurai and rise of Bushido the samurai were not always the revered warriors we think of today. Their story begins in Japan's Heian period, around 794 AD, a time when the imperial court in Kyoto was losing its grip over the distant provinces of Japan. As the power of the central government weakened, wealthy landowners in the countryside began to hire private warriors to protect their property and assert control. These warriors, known as bushi, were the earliest form of what would later be known as samurai. Over time, these bushi formed alliances, built their own armies, and became powerful in their own right. One of the key events that defined the rise of the samurai was the Genpei War 1180-1185, a bloody conflict between the Taira and Minamoto clans. The Minamoto, led by Minamoto no Yoritomo, emerged victorious and established the first shogunate military government, Kin Kamakura. This marked a turning point in Japanese history, as power shifted permanently from the emperor to the shogun, and from noble courtiers to warrior elites. The samurai were now at the top of Japan's social and political order. Unlike the knights of medieval Europe, who often fought for wealth or land, samurai were bound by a strict code of honor known as Bushido, or the way of the warrior. This code developed over centuries, blending influences from Confucianism, Zen Buddhism, and native Shinto beliefs. Bushido emphasized loyalty, courage, self-discipline, and honor above all. A samurai was expected to serve his lord with absolute devotion even unto death. Failure in duty, disloyalty, or defeat in battle could bring disgrace not only to the warrior, but to his entire family. In such cases, the only way to restore one's honor was through seppuku, or ritual suicide, a practice that became a haunting symbol of samurai ethics. The life of a samurai was a constant balancing act between fierce violence and quiet reflection. Zen Buddhism taught samurai to clear their minds of fear and doubt, helping them stay calm in the chaos of battle. At the same time, the religion encouraged a minimalist lifestyle, simplicity in art and action, and a deep awareness of death. This philosophy made its way into samurai practices such as tea ceremonies, poetry, writing, calligraphy, and even gardening. The result was a warrior class that not only mastered the art of war, but also contributed significantly to Japanese culture and aesthetics. During the Muromachi period, 1336 to 1573, the power of the shogunate weakened, and Japan descended into the chaos of the Sengoku Jidai, or Warring States period. This era was marked by nearly 2 centuries of civil war, as rival daimyo feudal lords battled for control of territory and influence. Out of this chaos emerged some of Japan's most legendary samurai leaders, including Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu. These men were more than just warriors, they were nation builders who laid the foundations for a unified Japan. Oda Nobunaga was ruthless and innovative, introducing firearms into Japanese warfare. Toyotomi Hideyoshi continued the work of unification and initiated policies that began to freeze the social order. But it was Tokugawa Ieyasu who finally brought peace by winning the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600 and establishing the Tokugawa shogunate in 1603. This marked the beginning of over 250 years of relative peace and stability, known as the Edo period. Under Tokugawa rule, the samurai were no longer needed on the battlefield. However, instead of disbanding them, the shogunate turned them into a bureaucratic class. They were expected to govern, manage records, collect taxes, and uphold moral order. This transformation from warrior to administrator was not always easy. Many samurai found it difficult to adjust to peacetime roles. They were still required to dress and behave according to their status, but without the wars of the past, their sense of purpose began to fade. Their once prized martial skills became ceremonial, their swords symbols of honor rather than tools of war. Despite this, the ideals of Bushido persisted, and samurai were still expected to live by its principles. They continued to practice swordsmanship and train in martial arts more as a discipline of the mind than for battlefield utility. Their loyalty shifted from local daimyo to the shogun, and the rigid class structure of the Tokugawa system ensured that samurai remained above farmers, artisans, and merchants in the social hierarchy. Even if many merchants became far wealthier than the warriors themselves, the samurai still enjoyed special privileges, such as wearing two swords and being exempt from certain taxes, but their economic situation grew increasingly precarious. Their stipends were fixed while the cost of living rose, and many fell into debt. This economic stress, coupled with a lack of real power, led to widespread dissatisfaction within the class. Some turned to scholarship and became teachers or moral philosophers. Others sought solace in artistic pursuits. But the samurai's decline was inevitable in a world that was rapidly changing. By the mid-19th century, Japan was facing pressure from Western powers to open its borders. When Commodore Matthew Perry arrived with American warships in 1853, the illusion of Japan's invulnerability was shattered. The shogunate's inability to respond effectively to this foreign threat caused a national crisis. Within 15 years, the Meiji Restoration would abolish the shogunate, restore power to the emperor, and begin a rapid modernization of the country. The feudal system was dismantled, and the samurai lost their privileges. A conscripted national army replaced the samurai class. And in 1877, the Satsuma Rebellion, led by Seigo Takamori, marked the last stand of the samurai. Although the rebellion was crushed, Seigo became a national hero and symbol of lost honor. The samurai age had ended, but their legacy endured. In modern Japan, Bushido continued to influence military culture, especially during World War II, when soldiers were taught to fight and die with samurai-like devotion. Today, the samurai live on in films, literature, and popular imagination, not just in Japan, but around the world. Their ideals of loyalty, honor, and discipline continue to inspire, reminding us of a time when warriors lived and died by a strict moral code, one that shaped the destiny of an entire nation. Life under the Tokugawa shogunate and the decline of the warrior class. The Tokugawa shogunate brought more than just political stability to Japan. It reshaped society in ways that deeply affected the samurai. With over 2 centuries of peace, Japan entered a unique period where war was almost non-existent, and the function of the warrior class began to shift dramatically. The start of the Edo period in 1603, the samurai were still very much the ruling elite, holding administrative and military control over various domains. The rigid social hierarchy placed them just below the shogun and the emperor, and above all other classes, peasants, artisans, and merchants. However, as the years passed and warfare declined, their relevance as fighters waned. Instead, they were tasked with serving as bureaucrats, magistrates, educators, and tax collectors. The katana, once a symbol of deadly efficiency in battle, became a ceremonial item worn as a sign of status and identity. For many samurai, this transition was a source of internal conflict. The Bushido code, which had defined their lives for centuries, emphasized virtues such as courage, martial prowess, and a willingness to die in battle. But now, those ideals clashed with the daily realities of paperwork, administration, and political obedience. The samurai were expected to be both moral guides and loyal servants of the Tokugawa regime. This meant living modest lives, avoiding displays of wealth or indulgence, and maintaining a dignified presence that reflected the state's authority. Yet, while their social standing remained high, many samurai struggled financially. They were paid in rice stipends, which remained fixed despite inflation and the rising cost of goods. Over time, many samurai found themselves deeply in debt. Some were forced to take on side jobs, marry into wealthy merchant families, or even sell their swords to survive. This growing disparity between their idealized image and their actual conditions led to a sense of disillusionment among many samurai. Despite these hardships, the Tokugawa period also saw a cultural flowering among the warrior class. With fewer battles to fight, samurai turned their attention to education, literature, and the arts. Many became patrons of no theater, tea ceremonies, flower arrangement, ikebana, and calligraphy. Samurai academies taught not just martial skills, but also Confucian ethics, classical Chinese texts, and the history of Japan. This shift toward intellectual refinement was seen as an extension of the Bushido code. Discipline of the mind was valued as much as discipline of the body. The blending of military virtue with scholarly learning created the image of the samurai as philosopher-warrior, a figure deeply respected in Japanese society. One of the more interesting developments during this time was the increased focus on writing and publishing. Samurai scholars wrote books on strategy, morality, and history. Some of the most famous works, like Hagakure by Yamamoto Tsunetomo, captured the spirit of Bushido in a time when its relevance was being questioned. Hagakure, which means hidden by the leaves, argued that a true samurai must be ready to die at any moment, even in a peaceful society. This philosophy, romantic and austere, inspired later generations and became a source of national pride. However, not all samurai agreed with this rigid interpretation of Bushido. Others believed the code should evolve, focusing more on service to the community and moral leadership rather than blind loyalty or ritual suicide. The debate over what it meant to be a samurai in an age of peace continued throughout the Edo period. As Japan remained closed to the outside world under the Sengoku closed country policy, these internal debates became deeply philosophical. But everything changed in the mid-19th century when foreign ships arrived on Japan's shores. In 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry of the United States Navy sailed into Edo Bay with a fleet of black steamships and demanded that Japan open its ports to trade. This moment was a shock to the nation. The superior technology and firepower of the West made it clear that Japan was behind. The Tokugawa government signed treaties with Western powers, and these unequal agreements sparked anger and embarrassment across Japan. Many samurai viewed the shogunate's capitulation as a betrayal of national honor. As anti-foreign and anti-Tokugawa sentiment grew, a new movement emerged in Jiji, meaning revere the emperor, expel the barbarians. Samurai from domains like Satsuma, Chur, and Tosa began to unite against the shogunate. These reformist samurai believed that the only way to save Japan was to restore power to the emperor and rapidly modernize. Their loyalty to Bushido now meant protecting the future of the nation, not just serving the shogun. The result was the Meiji Restoration in 1868. The shogun was deposed, and Emperor Meiji was declared the true sovereign of Japan. The new Meiji government was determined to modernize Japan along Western lines. One of their first acts was the abolition of the samurai class. The feudal system was dismantled, and the domains were replaced by prefectures. The wearing of swords in public was banned in 1876, and a new national army was formed based on conscription. For the samurai, this was a devastating blow. Their centuries-old privileges were stripped away almost overnight. Their social identity, once defined by honor and service, was now obsolete. Many former samurai became teachers, government officials, or businessmen. Others resisted the changes, holding on to the old ways. The most famous of these was Seigo Takamori, a loyal samurai from the Satsuma domain, who had helped bring about the Meiji Restoration. Disillusioned with the rapid westernization of Japan and the abandonment of samurai values, Seigo led a rebellion in 1877, known as the Satsuma Rebellion. It was a tragic and doomed uprising, as the modern Japanese army, trained with Western weapons and tactics, defeated the samurai forces. Seigo died in battle, but he became a symbol of samurai honor and resistance. His story was romanticized in books, plays, and eventually even in films. With the fall of the Satsuma Rebellion, the samurai era officially came to an end. But the legacy of Bushido remained. During the Meiji period and into the 20th century, the ideals of the samurai were reshaped to fit the needs of the modern Japanese state. Bushido was reinterpreted as a national code of conduct, emphasizing loyalty to the emperor, self-sacrifice for the nation, and moral discipline. These ideals were heavily promoted during Japan's militarization in the early 20th century, especially in schools and the military. Soldiers were taught that dying for the emperor was the ultimate expression of Bushido. During World War II, the samurai spirit was invoked to justify extreme acts of devotion, including kamikaze missions. In this way, the ancient code of the samurai was adapted for modern warfare and nationalistic purposes far removed from its original roots. After the war, Japan underwent a period of reflection and rebuilding. The country adopted a pacifist constitution, and the old militaristic interpretations of Bushido were abandoned. However, the cultural fascination with the samurai never disappeared. Samurai movies, manga, anime, and novels kept the warrior code alive in the public imagination. Characters like Miyamoto Musashi, Kenshin Himura, and Zatoichi became symbols of honor, discipline, and strength. The image of the lone samurai, stoic, skilled, and noble, became a global icon. Today, the samurai are seen not only as historical figures, but as carriers of timeless values. Bushido, stripped of its militarism, is admired for its focus on personal integrity, loyalty, and resilience. In business, leadership, sports, and even education, the principles of the samurai continue to inspire. Modern martial arts like Kendo, Iaido, and Judo still teach respect, discipline, and mental fortitude, all rooted in samurai philosophy. Museums across Japan preserve samurai armor, swords, and documents. While historical sites like Himagi Castle and Kumamoto Castle attract millions of visitors each year, schools still teach children about the Genpei War, the Edo period, and the Meiji Restoration not just as history, but as a lesson in the values that shaped their culture. In many ways, the samurai never truly died. Their physical role in society may have disappeared, but their spiritual and cultural presence lives on. Weapons, warfare, and the changing face of combat in samurai Japan, the evolution of samurai warfare tells a fascinating story of how military strategy, weapons, and values changed over time. In the early days of the samurai, around the Heian period, combat was often a highly ritualized affair. Battles were usually fought between small groups of mounted archers, who valued individual heroism and skill. Archery was considered the supreme martial art, and the image of a lone warrior on horseback firing arrows with precision became a cultural ideal. Duels between champions were common, and personal valor was often more important than tactics or numbers. The sword, though symbolic, was not yet the primary weapon of the samurai. That would change over the centuries, as Japan's warfare became bloodier, larger in scale, and more chaotic. During the Kamakura period 1185-1333, after the rise of the shogunate, samurai warfare shifted from noble duels to more brutal and organized battles. The Mongol invasions of Japan in 1274 and 1281 were pivotal in changing Japanese military tactics. The Mongols brought with them massed infantry attacks, catapults, explosives, and organized formations, things the Japanese were not used to. The invasions failed, in part due to typhoons later called kamikaze, or divine wind. But the experience taught the samurai that war was not just about honor, it was about survival and adaptability. The emphasis shifted from one-on-one combat to group strategies and fortifications. Japanese armor began to evolve, becoming heavier and more protective, yet still flexible enough for mounted combat. Samurai also began to fight on foot more often, wielding weapons like spears yari and polearms naginata, in addition to the bow. It wasn't until the Muromachi period that the sword, especially the katana, rose to prominence as the signature weapon of the samurai. The katana wasn't just a tool, it became a symbol of a warrior's soul. Its curved blade, razor-sharp edge, and exquisite craftsmanship made it ideal for close combat and drew fear and respect. Samurai were trained in various sword fighting styles and often carried two swords, the katana and the shorter wakizashi. As part of the Daishu set, the sword became an extension of the samurai's body, a part of his identity, and an object of reverence. Swordsmanship schools, or ryer, flourished across Japan, each with its own philosophies and techniques. The spiritual connection between a samurai and his sword was emphasized in both literature and education. The act of drawing the sword, attacking, and even sheathing it became rituals full of meaning. In peaceful times, sword training was as much about discipline and focus as it was about combat readiness. However, the real-world effectiveness of the katana was increasingly challenged as warfare evolved. The Sengoku period, 1467 to 1600, was perhaps the bloodiest era in Japanese history. Defined by constant civil war, betrayals, and sieges, daimyos raised massive armies, sometimes consisting of tens of thousands of ashigaru, foot soldiers alongside mounted samurai. Battles became less about honor and more about power, strategy, and logistics. Commanders like Oda Nobunaga revolutionized warfare by adopting gunpowder weapons, especially the Tanegashima, an early matchlock firearm introduced by the Portuguese in 1543. Nobunaga's victory at the Battle of Nagashino in 1575 demonstrated the effectiveness of firearms when he used disciplined volleys of arquebusiers to defeat traditional cavalry charges. From that point on, firearms became a key part of Japanese warfare, even though many samurai looked down upon them as dishonorable or impersonal. The sword remained a symbol of the samurai, but guns became a reality of war. Castles were fortified to withstand sieges, and large-scale battles became the norm. This period also saw the rise of strategic military writings, such as those by Takeda Shingen and Wasugi Kenshin, two rival warlords whose battles were studied for their tactics and logistics. Yet, even as warfare changed, the ideals of Bushido were still taught. Samurai were still expected to show courage, loyalty, and self-discipline, even in the face of new technology and mass warfare. Some adapted to the times, while others resisted change, preferring traditional weapons and values. With the rise of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Japan saw another shift. Hideyoshi, a former peasant who rose to become a supreme military leader, enacted laws that solidified the separation between classes. Most importantly, he passed a sword hunt law, which disarmed the peasantry and ensured that only the samurai could legally bear arms. This move preserved the samurai's unique status, even as their battlefield role was beginning to shrink. By the time of Tokugawa Ieyasu's rise and the start of the Edo period, warfare largely came to a halt. Japan entered over 250 years of relative peace, and the samurai's role shifted once again. Instead of fighting, they became guardians of tradition, law, and social order. Martial arts schools continued to teach swordsmanship, archery, and other skills. But these became more about personal development than preparing for real combat. The philosophy of Bushido was refined during this period. Different schools of thought interpreted it in various ways. Some emphasized loyalty and obedience. Others focused on stoicism and detachment from worldly desires. One of the most famous figures of this era was Miyamoto Musashi, a master swordsman and author of the Book of Five Rings, a treatise on strategy and combat. Musashi lived in the early Edo period and was known for winning over 60 duels. His book is still studied today, not only for its insights into swordsmanship, but also for its deep philosophical lessons on life, focus, and clarity. He advocated for adaptability in battle and in life, a lesson that became increasingly relevant for samurai as their world changed. During the Edo period, sword duels still occurred, but they were rare and often regulated. Samurai were expected to follow strict codes of conduct, and any unlawful violence could lead to severe punishment. Instead, martial skill was demonstrated through practice, competition, and performance. Kendo, the way of the sword, emerged as a formalized martial art, combining physical skill with spiritual discipline. Training in Kendo or Ado, the art of drawing the sword, was not just about defeating an opponent. It was about achieving inner peace, mental clarity, and mastery over oneself. As Western powers began to make contact with Japan in the 19th century, the contrast between modern militaries and Japan's traditional warrior class became increasingly stark. While samurai still trained with swords, the rest of the world had adopted rifles, cannons, and industrialized warfare. The Boshin War 1868-1869 was fought between pro-imperial forces and the Tokugawa shogunate, showcased this transformation. Samurai fought bravely on both sides, but those aligned with the emperor embraced modern weapons and tactics. The imperial forces, backed by Western technology, quickly gained the upper hand. Samurai units carrying swords and spears found themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered. This conflict signaled the end of samurai warfare and the beginning of a modern, unified Japan. Even after the Meiji Restoration, some samurai clung to their swords, refusing to give up their traditions. But the government was determined to build a national army modeled after Western powers. Conscription replaced the hereditary warrior class, and military training focused on drills, firearms, and discipline rather than individual swordsmanship. The abolition of the samurai class in the 1870s was a profound moment in Japanese history. Yet, the memory of the samurai as noble warriors never faded. Their weapons, especially the katana, remained symbols of pride and craftsmanship. Swordsmiths continued to make traditional blades, even as their use became ceremonial. The Japanese government preserved samurai relics in museums, and martial arts schools adapted to modern times. The mystique of the samurai was further cemented by literature, theater, and later film. Stories of tragic heroes, loyal retainers, and honorable deaths became central to Japan's national identity. The Cheshingura, or Tale of the 47 Ronin, tells the true story of a group of samurai who avenged their master's death and then committed seppuku. This tale became a symbol of loyalty and justice, retold countless times in plays, books, and movies. In the 20th century, the samurai spirit was revived in new forms. During World War II, Japanese soldiers were taught to embody Bushido, fighting with courage, endurance, and self-sacrifice. The katana even reappeared on the battlefield as a symbol of the officer's role and authority. However, this militarized version of Bushido differed greatly from its original form, being shaped more by nationalism than moral philosophy. In modern Japan, samurai culture continues to be celebrated and respected. Martial arts, museums, historical reenactments, and festivals keep the spirit alive. Foreign interest in the samurai has grown as well, with global audiences drawn to their discipline, elegance, and warrior ethos. The katana is now recognized not just as a weapon, but as a work of art. Its forging is considered a sacred process, reflecting the harmony of fire, steel, and spirit. Through the evolution of their weapons and warfare, the samurai showed that adaptability, discipline, and philosophy could survive even as the world changed around them. Though the battlefield has long since disappeared, the code of the warrior lives on, not just in museums or martial arts schools, but in the hearts of people who still seek honor, courage, and purpose. The legacy of Bushido and the samurai spirit in modern Japan and the world. The legacy of the samurai did not vanish with the collapse of the Tokugawa shogunate or the modernization of Japan. Instead, the essence of Bushido, the moral code that guided the samurai, continued to influence Japanese identity, values, and society. Even as swords were banned, the virtues of loyalty, honor, discipline, and courage found new life in other areas of life. In the Meiji era, after the abolition of the samurai class, Japan rapidly transformed itself into a modern industrial state. The government, while striving to modernize the military, economy, and education, understood that national unity required a shared moral foundation. To fill the spiritual gap left by the end of feudalism, the Meiji leadership incorporated elements of Bushido into the national education system. School textbooks began teaching moral lessons that were inspired by samurai ideals, such as self-sacrifice, duty to one's family and country, and respect for authority. These values were presented not as relics of the past, but as timeless truths that could guide Japan's future. The Bushido Code, which had once governed a small warrior elite, was now promoted as a standard for all Japanese citizens. In the early 20th century, particularly during the rise of imperial militarism, Bushido was further embraced by the state. The military adopted a version of the code that emphasized absolute loyalty to the emperor and a willingness to die for the nation. Soldiers were taught to endure pain, resist fear, and obey commands without question. This reinterpretation of Bushido played a major role in shaping Japan's behavior during World War II, where fanatical devotion and sacrifices, especially among kamikaze pilots, was viewed as a modern continuation of samurai tradition. However, this version of Bushido was a far cry from the original code that had emphasized justice, benevolence, and honor. After Japan's defeat in 1945, the country entered a period of intense reflection. The militaristic version of Bushido was discredited, but the core samurai values remained. In post-war Japan, many of these ideals were rechanneled into peaceful endeavors. In the corporate world, business leaders began to model their work ethic and leadership principles on samurai discipline. Loyalty to the company, tireless effort, and group harmony became hallmarks of Japanese work culture. The metaphor of the company as a battlefield and the executive as a general echoed the structure of old samurai households. This new form of economic samurai helped Japan rebuild and rise to become a global economic power in the second half of the 20th century. In sports and education, Bushido continued to play an important role. Martial arts such as kendo, swordsmanship, judo, the gentle way, karate, empty hand, and aikido, the way of harmony, gained popularity both in Japan and internationally. These disciplines stressed respect, discipline, mental focus, and self-improvement over aggression. In kendo, for example, practitioners wear armor reminiscent of samurai gear and wield bamboo swords in duels that simulate real combat. However, victory in these sports is not about defeating an enemy, but about mastering oneself. In this way, the martial spirit of the samurai survives in peaceful, structured, and philosophical forms. The image of the samurai has also remained strong in Japanese popular culture. From early black and white films by Akira Kurosawa such as Seven Samurai and Yojimbo 2, modern anime series like Rurouni Kenshin and Samurai Champloo, the figure of the wandering swordsman continues to fascinate audiences. These stories often explore themes of redemption, duty, and the struggle between tradition and modernity. They portray samurai not as bloodthirsty warriors, but as deeply conflicted individuals, trying to live by an ancient code in a changing world. These portrayals have captivated not only Japanese audiences, but also international fans. Hollywood has drawn heavily on samurai themes, especially in films like The Last Samurai, which fictionalizes the Meiji Restoration and the Satsuma Rebellion. And in Star Wars, where the Jedi Order is loosely based on samurai philosophy, the visual iconography of the samurai, the top-knot, the armor, the katana, has become global shorthand for discipline, mysticism, and martial honor. Museums around the world feature exhibitions on samurai history and artifacts, drawing millions of visitors interested in their armor, weapons, and way of life. At home in Japan, historical reenactments and festivals are held each year to celebrate famous battles, honor local samurai heroes, and keep the history alive for new generations. K-towns like Kaku-no-date, Kanazawa, and Aisu preserve samurai districts where old residences, training grounds, and even ancient scrolls are kept. Tourists walk through cobbled streets where samurai once lived, dressed in replica armor, learning about feudal society in interactive and educational ways. Beyond the romantic image, the legacy of the samurai remains relevant in Japan's modern challenges. In an era of rapid technology, globalization, and social change, many Japanese look back to the samurai not out of nostalgia, but as a source of grounding values. The concept of giri duty or obligation, and ninjo personal feelings, continues to shape how people navigate complex moral and social dilemmas. These principles, which were often in tension during the samurai era, are still used in dramas, films, and literature to explore themes of sacrifice, honor, and the individual's place in society. The balance between modernity and tradition is one that Japan continues to manage carefully, and the Bushido spirit provides a cultural lens through which that balance is measured. Even in diplomacy, Japanese leaders have occasionally referenced samurai ideals as metaphors for national strength, discipline, and resilience. The symbolism of the samurai also resonates in international business negotiations, where Japanese companies often approach deals with patience, precision, and a long-term view that echoes the strategic mindset of the warrior. Globally, the admiration for samurai values has grown. In a world increasingly characterized by speed, convenience, and short-term thinking, the samurai ethos offers something different: a focus on discipline, long-term commitment, honor in action, and the courage to stand by one's principles. Modern leadership seminars, personal development coaches, and motivational speakers have drawn from samurai philosophy to inspire audiences around the world. Concepts from the Book of Five Rings, Hogakure, and other samurai texts are cited alongside Western classics like Sun Tzu's Art of War or Machiavelli's The Prince. The idea that a life well lived requires personal sacrifice, mental clarity, and a clear sense of duty continues to resonate. Samurai values also play a role in modern ethical debates. In a world facing moral crises, ranging from corporate corruption to political dishonesty, the question arises: what does it mean to live with honor today? The samurai faced this same question, particularly during the peaceful Edo period when their battlefield roles vanished. Their response was to redefine honor not in terms of killing, but in how one lived daily life. This emphasis on character, sincerity, and self-improvement remains a powerful legacy. In this way, the Bushido code has outlived the men who created it. Though swords rust and armor fades, the principles forged in fire and battle endure. From school children reciting lessons on respect and duty to artists crafting stories about sacrifice and redemption. To athletes striving for excellence through discipline, these are the modern echoes of the samurai spirit. As Japan continues to evolve, it does so with a deep cultural memory that honors the samurai not just as warriors, but as moral exemplars. The story of the samurai is not just a tale of rise and fall, but a lasting influence that shaped a nation's soul. The samurai did not simply disappear with modernization. They were transformed into something broader and more spiritual. Their values became part of Japan's identity and a gift to the world, a reminder that in any era, the greatest battles are those we fight within ourselves, and the highest victory is living a life of honor.